For 3 merciless seasons, the sky above Majinuru village behaved like a sealed vault, locked tight, unmoved by prayers, untouched by the desperation rising from the people who needed just one drop of mercy. Every sunrise arrived with the quiet cruelty of a new reminder. The heavens had abandoned them. And in the midst of that abandonment, a young girl carried a belief so bold it felt like a rebellion against despair itself. For months, the land had been stripped of its color, its voice, and its softness, leaving behind cracked earth that looked like a map of suffering carved by the sun itself. Day after day, the horizon shimmered under unbearable heat, bending the air into waves as if mocking the villagers with an illusion of water. Crops that once stood tall were now nothing but brittle ghosts whispering in the wind. The maize fields lay flattened, not by storms, but by starvation of the soil. Even the strongest elders, whose stories had once carried entire generations, now sat on wooden stools with trembling hands, their eyes dimming like fading lanterns. The wells, once proud and singing with life, now offered nothing but hollow echoes. People lined up before them at dawn, palms cupped, gourds ready. But no matter how long they waited, nothing rose from the darkness except disappointment. Mothers learned to stretch meals into shadows of nourishment, scraping the last grains from the bottoms of clay pots and sharing them with the quiet dignity of women who had endured far too many seasons of loss. Fathers walked long distances searching for pasture for their dying livestock, often returning with nothing but dust on their clothes and sorrow in their eyes. Through all of this, 12-year-old Nalia watched the world around her shrink into a shape she barely recognized. She watched her mother break a single piece of maize into small fragments, placing them carefully into a bowl as if handling something sacred. She saw her younger brother lick water from the inside of a cup, as though even the memory of moisture was something to preserve. Yet in Nalia's chest lived a strange, stubborn warmth, a belief that the sky, no matter how silent, could still hear someone who spoke from a place deeper than fear. She was not bold by nature. She had always been the quiet child who lingered in corners, observing more than she spoke. But the drought had awakened something inside her, something she did not fully understand. Every evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, she found herself looking upward, studying the color of the sky with an intensity she could not explain. It felt as though she was waiting for a sign she had never been promised, holding on to a hope no one had taught her. The villagers had long stopped praying to the Hill of Ancestors, the sacred place where rain rituals were once performed, where elders had climbed with offerings and chants. They feared that approaching it during such divine silence might anger the spirits further. But Nalia felt no such fear. She felt a pull, gentle yet persistent, as though her name had been whispered by something beyond the village huts, beyond the dust, beyond the heat. She tried to ignore it, but each day the feeling grew stronger, wrapping itself around her thoughts like a vine determined to bloom. One night, when the wind was still and the stars seemed dimmer than usual, she rose quietly from her sleeping mat. Her mother was too exhausted to wake, her breathing deep and uneven from days without proper nourishment. Nalia stepped outside, the ground warm beneath her feet, and the air thick with the scent of dust and dying earth. The village was silent, every home swallowed in darkness. She walked past the empty marketplace, past the dry well, past the fields where moonlight revealed the scars of drought. The path to the prayer hill was steep and lonely, but she climbed it with steady steps, her heartbeat echoing the quiet hope nestled inside her chest. The higher she went, the more she felt the world shift, a strange awareness settling over her, as if the hill recognized the courage she carried. At the summit, she knelt on the heated stone, folding her hands tightly, unsure if she was praying to the sky, the ancestors, or something unnamed inside herself. And then, something impossible happened. The air around her shifted, soft, cold, deliberate. A sudden chill brushed across her cheek, a coldness that did not belong to the burning night. And in that breath of impossible wind, she sensed it. Someone, or something, had come to listen. The morning after her secret prayer, Nalia walked back into Maji Nuru village with a stillness so deep, so strange, it unsettled even those who still believed miracles were possible. It was not the stillness of fear, nor the heaviness of despair, but something quieter, something steady, something that made even the most exhausted eyes follow her with a mixture of wonder and unease. For the first time in months, she carried a calmness untouched by drought, and that calmness frightened people far more than emptiness ever had. She entered her home, just as the first thin rays of sunlight pushed through the dusty air, painting the hut in pale gold. Her mother sat on a woven mat, sorting the last of the grain into a bowl that looked more like a reminder of hunger than a meal. She glanced up, expecting to see a child tired from the night, frightened or lost. But Nalia's face held a tiny glow, not bright, not bold, but unmistakable, a glow shaped by certainty. Her mother's hands paused mid-air, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. Something unspoken trembled between them. "Where were you?" her mother asked, her voice carrying the soft ache of sleepless nights and unanswered prayers. Nalia stepped closer, lowering her gaze with humility rather than guilt. "The sky heard me," she whispered, as though sharing a secret she was still learning to understand. Her mother blinked, unsure whether to feel hope or fear. Hope felt dangerous now, a fragile luxury they could no longer afford to indulge. But fear was familiar, predictable, easier to carry. She chose silence instead, watching her daughter with the cautious reverence one might give to an unexpected visitor. Outside, the village had begun to stir, and word traveled quicker than the rising sun. Children who once played with dust-covered marbles now trailed behind Nalia, studying her as though she had returned from a journey beyond the ordinary world. They did not touch her. They did not speak. They merely followed, their footsteps soft and curious, forming a timid procession behind a girl who had walked into the night and come back changed. Adults, on the other hand, were less enchanted. A woman drawing water from an empty pot nudged her neighbor and pointed silently at Nalia with narrowed eyes. A man repairing a broken fence stiffened when she passed, watching her with a guarded expression. A group of women tending to their sick goats paused as she approached, shielding their children subtly, as if to protect them from something unseen. In every stare was the same question. What had she touched, and what had touched her back? Rumors traveled through the village like shadows stretching across the ground. "She climbed the prayer hill alone," someone whispered. "She tempted the spirits," another muttered. "She brought something back with her," an elder warned in a trembling voice that carried more dread than certainty. The chief, hearing the murmurs twist into warnings, called a council meeting under the old baobab tree. His face held the burden of a man torn between superstition and leadership. When Nalia stood before the council, she did not tremble. Instead, she met their questioning stares with a clarity children rarely possessed. The chief, his voice weighed down by worry, asked, "Do you understand what you have done?" But she only lifted her chin and replied, with the same steady simplicity she had given her mother, "The sky heard me." The village gasped softly, as though her words carried both blessing and danger. Some elders exchanged fearful glances, unwilling to accept that the drought had not broken their spirits alone. It had broken their courage to hope. One elder stepped forward, his voice shaking with the remnants of ancient belief. "You must not call to what sleeps," he warned. "There are forces that punish bold hearts." But Nalia listened with respect, not fear, her eyes reflecting the quiet triumph of someone who had glimpsed something larger than the warnings of men. As the council ended, the village found itself divided. Some whispered that Nalia was a sign of awakening, a child chosen by unseen hands. Others muttered that she was a danger, a spark that could ignite more suffering than relief. But regardless of belief, No one could ignore the strange steadiness in her steps, or the unusual peace she carried. A peace untouched by hunger, untouched by fear, untouched by drought. That night, long after fires dimmed and people retreated into restless sleep, the village lay wrapped in the thick silence that had become its new normal. But just as the darkness settled into its usual heaviness, a deep rumble rolled across the sky. A sound so low it trembled through the sleeping huts like a heartbeat awakening after years of stillness. People stirred, startled, confused, glancing upward with hope they were too afraid to embrace. Yet the sky remained empty, not a single cloud in sight. And as the villagers struggled to understand the impossible sound, Nalia opened her eyes in the dark, feeling a presence in the air, a silent promise that the sky had begun to move. The night had fallen into its usual silence, yet something beneath that silence stirred with an intelligence older than the land itself. And when Nalia heard her name slip through the darkness, not shouted, not spoken, but breathed into the air with uncanny gentleness, she understood instantly that the call did not belong to any human tongue. It was an invitation woven from mystery, a soft summons that made her heartbeat stutter, with both fear and destiny. Nalia stepped out of the hut with the caution of someone crossing the threshold between the world she knew and the one she had never dared to imagine. The warm earth pressed against her bare feet, and the night wind curled softly around her as though greeting her arrival. For a moment she believed she might find someone standing near the doorway, a neighbor, a child, anyone needing help. But the world was empty. Empty except for a river of tiny golden lights drifting in the darkness like a celestial thread dropped from the sky. Fireflies, hundreds of them, glowed in a perfect line, moving as one, their shimmering bodies pulsing in patient rhythm, waiting for her to follow. The stillness of the night felt alive, breathing with every movement she made. When she took her first step toward the glittering path, the fireflies drifted backward in quiet retreat, guiding her with a purpose that dissolved all hesitation. She walked between tall grasses that whispered against her ankles, their tips swaying as if bowing to the presence of something unseen. The deeper she went, the more the world around her changed, not in shape, but in feeling. The air grew heavier, thicker, carrying an ancient awareness that wrapped around her like a cloak. Each step she placed upon the earth carried a sensation she had never felt before, as though the ground beneath her recognized her weight, memorizing her movement with the intimacy of a guardian marking its chosen one. She sensed eyes upon her, not hostile, not human, but observant, ancient, patient. The fireflies guided her beyond the final hut, past the skeletal remains of what once had been a vibrant cassava field, toward the forgotten edge of the village where old stories slept in the soil. The ancestral well rose before her, like a relic pulled from memory, circular stones covered in vines, its mouth silent, its depths long abandoned. Once the well had been a place of ceremony, where elders sang to the heavens and called for rain with voices that carried strength through the winds. But drought had silenced those rituals, leaving the well to collapse into solitude, visited now only by insects and whispers. Yet tonight, the well pulsed faintly, as if the fireflies had awakened something slumbering at its core. The moment she stepped closer, the air vibrated, not violently, but with a gentle hum that spread outward in slow, rippling waves. It was a sound that felt ancient, as though born from the first breath the world ever took. The fireflies hovered above the well in a glowing ring, illuminating the stones with a soft gold that made them appear almost warm. Nalia approached the edge, leaning forward just enough to sense a breath rising from the darkness below. And then the hum gathered itself, condensed into a single point, and opened into a voice unlike any she had ever known. It was neither man nor woman, neither old nor young. It carried the echoes of countless seasons, countless winds, countless prayers. The voice filled the air around her, slipping gently into her ears, yet settling deeper, into her chest, into her bones. "Nalia," it whispered, shaping her name with reverence, as though honoring the courage that had brought her there. "We heard your plea." She felt the world tilt, not with fear, but with the weight of understanding. Something powerful, something unseen, something older than stories knew her, saw her, chose her. "You seek rain for those who suffer," the voice continued, its tone carrying a depth of sorrow and understanding. "But rain awakens forces buried beneath sacrifice. Blessings do not come without cost, and the price is not one any ordinary heart can bear." Nalia's breath wavered, yet she did not step back. She thought of her mother's trembling hands, the hollowed fields, the starving goats, the children whose laughter had been swallowed by thirst. Her fear dissolved into a quiet determination that steadied her like an anchor. "What must I give?" she asked softly, her voice strengthened by the courage born from desperation. The fireflies froze mid-air, as if the question had shifted the sky itself. The hum faded into stillness. Even the grasses stopped moving, held captive by the moment's gravity. For a heartbeat, the world existed without breath, without sound, suspended on the edge of revelation. Then the voice rose again, soft, steady, and terrifying in its calm certainty, as it asked the question that would reshape her fate. "What will you give for the life of your people?" And as the final word echoed across the well, the night collapsed into a silence so unnatural, it felt like the world was waiting for her answer. The night had not been kind to Maji Nuru village for seasons, yet in that one trembling moment, standing before the silent ancestral well, Nalia felt the weight of her entire world gather behind her shoulders. And in the breath between fear and faith, she understood something no child should ever have to realize: that when a people have nothing left to give, sometimes only a single heart remains to make the impossible choice. A heart like hers. The well loomed before her, not as a forgotten relic, but as a witness awakened after years of abandonment. Vines curled around its rim, their leaves trembling as though aware of the sacred moment unfolding in the darkness. The fireflies that had guided her flickered low, casting a soft golden haze over the stone circle, making it appear like an altar built from the bones of ancient prayers. The air felt thick with presence, as though spirits who once guarded the prosperity of generations now waited in reverent silence. Nalia stood at the edge, her breath shallow, her hands cold despite the night's lingering heat. She knew she had arrived here not because she was brave, but because she could no longer bear watching her village slowly crumble into dust. The hunger, the thirst, the quiet suffering etched into the faces she loved. It had carved a resolve inside her fragile frame, a resolve older than her years. She leaned forward, peering into the well's shadowed depths, and felt the faint exhale of cool air rising from below, brushing against her skin like a greeting. When the voice returned, it did not echo. It simply existed, everywhere and nowhere, woven into the night with a softness that carried more gravity than thunder. "You stand before us," it murmured, its tone steady, observant, ancient. "Yet you bring no offering of grain, no water, no precious stone. What can a child give to move the sky?" Nalia swallowed hard. Her voice caught in her chest for a heartbeat before she found the strength to release it. "I have nothing," she whispered, her words trembling, yet holding a strange steadiness. "Nothing except myself." The admission felt like lifting a stone, lodged deep within her spirit, revealing the raw truth beneath. She stepped closer, hands trembling at her sides. "If rain returns, if my people can live, I will give what I am, my strength, my innocence, my future, whatever is asked of me." The well fell silent, as though the spirits inside were weighing her words with the precision of judges who understood the full shape of sacrifice. Then the voice rose again, this time carrying the layered tones of caution, awe, and sorrow. "Do you understand what you offer?" it asked. "You bargain with the thread that binds your path. A price like this leaves marks no season can erase. It reshapes the giver, as surely as rain reshapes the earth." She wanted to hesitate. She wanted to turn back. She wanted to be a child again, untouched by impossible choices. But she saw her village in her mind, the children scraping the ground for drops of moisture, the elders praying with voices cracked by thirst, her mother breaking food into fractions too small to be called meals. The ache of those memories tightened around her ribs, pushing her past fear. "I understand," she said, and though her voice was soft, its certainty reached the roots of the night. A shift rippled through the air, subtle but unmistakable, as though something vast had nodded its acceptance. The fireflies lowered in unison, gathering around her hands. Their collective glow brightened until her palms were bathed in warm, soft light that pulsed gently, like a small sun awakening beneath her skin. She gasped, not in pain, but in astonished wonder, feeling the warmth spread through her fingers, up her arms, into the quiet chambers of her heart. The well inhaled deeply, releasing a slow ribbon of cool air that wrapped around her like a blessing. The fireflies spiraled upward in graceful arcs, forming delicate patterns that shimmered as though painting invisible symbols in the night. The hum that had lived beneath the earth softened into a resonant peace, settling into the ground like a vow sealed in silence. "You have offered more than we expected," the voice said at last, carrying a reverence that made her spine straighten. "Your courage is seen. Your heart is marked. The bond is sealed." Her hands dimmed to their natural shade, but the warmth lingering beneath her skin told her something irreversible had been set into motion. She stepped back from the well, physically unchanged, yet carrying a weight she had never known before, a weight not of burden, but of destiny. And then, with a final breath that seemed to rise from the deepest layer of the earth, the spirit whispered, "Go home, and witness what follows." As she turned away, the darkness behind her trembled softly, as though something ancient had begun to stir in her wake. At the first blush of dawn, when the village still clung to sleep and the world felt suspended between breath and silence, a thin silver streak stretched across the sky, so delicate it seemed ready to disappear, yet so deliberate it carried a weight no ordinary cloud had ever held. Even from a distance, it shimmered like a secret trying to reveal itself, stirring an unease that felt too fragile to name and too dangerous to ignore. And as that faint streak glowed against the pale horizon, Nalia sensed, deep in the quiet place beneath her ribs, that the sky had begun to remember her. Maji Nuru village awakened slowly, its people wrapped in the dull heaviness of another thirsty morning. But the air felt different, not cooler, not wetter, but watchful, as though something unseen hovered just above the treetops. Birds gathered earlier than their usual hour, filling the branches of withering acacia trees with a restless energy. Their chirps, once scattered and weary, now formed strange patterns. 3 sharp calls followed by long, trembling notes, then a sudden, unified silence, as if they awaited a reply from the sky itself. Their wings fluttered against the stillness like whispers of a prophecy stirring. Children were the first to point toward the silver streak forming behind the distant hills. Their small fingers trembled with the excitement only innocence could afford, tugging on the hems of their mothers' dresses, begging them to look. Women glanced up with tired eyes, offering faint smiles that struggled between wanting to believe and fearing disappointment. Clouds had lied before, drifting close enough to tease, but never close enough to bless. But this streak was different, steady, unmoving, almost anchored. The elders, drawn by the murmurs of unease, gathered beneath the old baobab tree, its roots gripping the soil like the hands of ancestors refusing to loosen their hold. Their eyes narrowed with worn caution, studying the horizon with the familiarity of men who had once spoken to the sky as if it were kin. "Do not trust a sky that remembers too late," an elder muttered, leaning heavily on his carved walking stick. Another nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. "False hope," he warned, "breaks more bones than drought ever could." But Nalia did not step away from the sky. She stood near her mother's hut, her posture still, her breath quietly listening to the shift humming through the morning. It was not wind. It was not birds. It was something deeper, something she recognized from the ancestral well, something that moved like invisible hands brushing past her shoulders. She felt it settling around her, circling like a soft promise trying to find a place to land. The silver streak thickened almost imperceptibly, and the faintest shadow of a cloud curled at its edge. Not dark, not threatening, just present, like a story forming its first word. Nalia lifted her hand slowly, not knowing why, only knowing that her spirit seemed to rise with the sky, as though drawn by a quiet force she could no longer resist. The village buzzed with cautious whispers behind her, but her focus narrowed, breath catching as the air cooled, not around the village, not around the fields, but around her skin alone. Then it happened. From a sky still technically empty, from clouds too faint to cast shadows, from a heaven silent for 3 seasons, a single raindrop fell. It slipped through the warming dawn like a shard of living silver and landed in the center of Nalia's open palm with a certainty that made her heart jolt. Cold, real, unmistakable. She stared at it, wide-eyed, her breath unraveling in a trembling gasp as the drop held its perfect shape, round, bright, glistening like a small piece of moonlight resting on her skin. She lifted her head, expecting more drops, expecting the sky to open, expecting the miracle to spread. But the heavens remained dry, the air unchanged. Only her hand carried the blessing. The single drop shimmered as if it recognized her, pulsing faintly before melting into her skin, leaving a trail of coolness that lingered longer than nature should allow. Slowly, the whispers grew louder. Children approached first, drawn by something they sensed but could not name. Their eyes widened when they saw the last trace of water glimmering across her palm. Soon adults crept closer, their expressions tightening with alarm as realization spread. The sky had touched only her. And then, with the weight of fear crashing through their instincts, they stepped back. Faces shifted from wonder to dread, from curiosity to suspicion, as if Nalia had crossed a boundary no human should ever cross. And in that widening circle of fear, she felt the truth settle cold inside her. The miracle had chosen her alone, and not everyone believed that was a blessing. Hope should have lifted the village, but instead, it wrapped itself around Nalia like a creeping shadow. The very people who once smiled at her with the softness reserved for children now circled her with suspicion so sharp it felt capable of cutting through skin. And in the fragile quiet between sunrise and fear, Nalia realized that sometimes a miracle does not arrive welcomed. It arrives misunderstood. The moment the cold raindrop vanished into her palm, murmurs began weaving through the village like threads of unease pulled by invisible hands. Mothers clutched their children closer, fathers exchanged looks filled with uneasy questions, and elders stared at her with eyes that searched not for truth, but for danger. The fear grew faster than reason. It spread in whispers, swelling into doubts that reached every corner of Maji Nuru before the sun fully climbed the sky. The first accusation came from a woman known for her sharp tongue, her voice slicing through the morning air. "She has called upon something dangerous," she declared, pointing at Nalia as though accusing her of breaking a sacred law. "Spirits do not choose children unless they want something in return." Others murmured in agreement, their words trembling with the exhaustion of heartbreak disguised as anger. Another villager stepped forward, insisting Nalia must have fabricated the drop, perhaps wetting her hand from the drinking gourd behind the huts. "She wants to manipulate us," he muttered darkly. "Make us think she speaks with the sky." The chief, a man whose authority had once brought comfort, now looked at her with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. He walked toward Nalia slowly, studying her face as though searching for a confession she did not have. With a heavy sigh, he raised his staff. "From today," he announced, "no one will climb the ancestral hill, and no one, not even you, will pray for rain again. The ancestors are restless. We will not risk their anger." His words struck harder than any insult. The crowd shifted, murmuring approval as if his decree had shielded them from unseen danger. Gasps scattered the air as villagers stepped back from her, forming a circle that locked her in the center, like an accusation written in dust. Nalia felt her throat tighten, but not because she feared punishment. Instead, she feared the widening space between her and the people she wished to save. As she walked toward the market later that day, whispered insults followed her like shadows glued to her heels. "Sky child," some hissed mockingly. "Witchling," others muttered, turning away before their eyes could meet hers. Even the women she had once helped carry baskets treated her presence like an omen, their gazes sharpening whenever she passed. Their fear twisted her innocent act into something monstrous. The children she used to play with at dusk, children who once shared stories and laughter with her, hid behind their mother's wrapper skirts as she approached. Their small eyes peeked out with fear, confusion, and a question she could not bear to answer. What changed? She felt the ache of their retreat like a tightening rope around her chest, pulling her breath thinner with every step. Her mother, weary from years of hardship, watched all of this with a heart caught between pride and trembling worry. She tried to pull Nalia into the safety of their hut, urging her to avoid the chaos unfolding in the village. But Nalia gently shook her head and stepped back outside. Her spirit, though shaken, refused to dim. She had seen signs no one else had witnessed. She had felt the promise the sky whispered. Her faith, instead of crumbling, grew quieter, firmer, like embers that refused to die, even when the wind turned fierce. She returned to her chores, sweeping dust from the hut's entrance and arranging the few remaining water calabashes with a calmness that did not belong to a child. Villagers watched her from a distance, waiting for her to break, to cry, to hide, to defend herself. But she did none of those things. She moved through the day with a tranquility that made some uneasy and others even more suspicious, as though her calmness was proof of something unexplainable. The sun sank, spreading its final gold across the sky like a curtain slowly closing on a troubled day. The village quieted, though tension still clung to the air like smoke. Nalia sat outside her hut, watching the horizon with steady eyes. Her mother sat beside her silently, unable to offer comfort, but unwilling to leave her alone. The world felt still, too still, as if holding its breath. Then, without warning, the sky trembled. A deep sound rolled across the heavens, low, heavy, impossible to ignore. It was not the whisper of distant storm clouds or the playful rumble of shifting wind. It was a groan, ancient and powerful, like the earth itself responding to a call only it could hear. The villagers ran outside, searching the sky with wide eyes. No clouds, no rain, no signs of a storm, just thunder, louder, closer, alive. And as that thunder rolled again, shaking dust from rooftops and fear from hidden corners, every gaze turned slowly toward Nalia. Because the sky was answering something, and it was answering her. For the first time in 3 long, merciless years, shadows slid across the land, slow, wide, and deliberate. But they were not the shadows of fear, not the shadows of despair or famine or helplessness. They came from something far more powerful, an army of thick rolling clouds marching over the horizon with the authority of forgotten gods returning to claim the sky. And as those shadows stretched across the cracked earth, every heartbeat in Maji Nuru seemed to pause, as if the village itself stood at the edge of destiny. Morning began like any other, with dust rising from the ground as villagers swept their doorsteps and the distant bleating of the few remaining goats echoing weakly through the fields. But beneath the ordinary rhythm lay an unusual stillness, a subtle tension whispering through the air. It felt as if the earth was listening, waiting, bracing for something it remembered, but had not felt in seasons. Even the light seemed to hesitate, dimming for a breath, then dimming again. Mothers looked up from their chores, fathers straightened their backs mid-task, and children paused in their play, all sensing the faint tremor of change moving toward them. Then the sky began to shift. What began as a faint smudge at the farthest edge of the horizon slowly thickened into a dark, swelling mass. One cloud, then another behind it, then another, rising like the shoulders of giants. The sky darkened with a slow, steady determination, not in patches or streaks, but in waves, heavy, layered, and synchronized, like a great celestial army marching in perfect formation. Their movement carried purpose. Their shadows rolled across the plains with a rhythm that felt ancient, intentional, and sovereign. Villagers emerged from their huts, shielding their eyes as they stepped into the dimming light. Confusion flickered across their faces at first, replaced quickly by disbelief, then by something sharper, a trembling, breathless mixture of panic and desperate hope. Hands flew to mouths, bodies froze mid-step. Conversations evaporated into stunned silence. It was a sight none of them had dared dream of, not after countless mornings of barren skies that mocked their prayers. The air began to smell different, subtle at first, like a memory drifting back from the past. It carried the faint, unmistakable scent of wet earth awakening, the scent of soil remembering how to breathe. A hush rippled through the crowd as villagers lifted their faces to the sky, inhaling deeply, their eyes widening as the fragrance grew stronger. Some staggered backward as tears sprang to their eyes from nothing more than the shock of recognition. Even the trees responded. The ancient acacias, worn thin by years of relentless heat, began to sway. Not violently, not chaotically, but with a slow reverence, as though bowing to a returning king. Their branches rustled with trembling anticipation, the dry leaves whispering secrets to the gathering storm. Dust lifted from the ground, swirling in small spirals before settling again, as if kneeling in greeting. Animals sensed it too. Goats lifted their heads sharply, ears pricked toward the sky. Birds, those that had not migrated away in despair, took flight and circled the village in wide arcs, their cries sharper and more hopeful than they had been in years. Even the stray dogs stood still, noses turned upward, sensing life threading its way back into the world. In the center of the village, Nalia stood as though rooted to the earth by something more powerful than fear. She felt the spirit's presence expanding inside her chest, not as a voice this time, but as a steady pulse aligned with her heartbeat. The warmth from the night at the ancestral well reignited beneath her skin, spreading through her arms, her shoulders, her breath. It was not painful. It was not frightening. It felt like being connected to something vast, something alive, something watching the world through her. Villagers glanced at her with widening eyes, some in awe, others in fear. Her calmness unsettled them. Her stillness felt too certain. As the clouds rolled forward, layering themselves thicker and darker until the sky resembled a great shifting tapestry, Nalia closed her eyes for a moment, not in prayer, not in fear, but in deep recognition. She felt the sky approaching her, not the village. It was as if the clouds had come searching for her specifically, answering a promise she had dared to make. The wind picked up suddenly, swirling around her ankles, lifting the edges of her worn dress. It carried a deep sound, a low, distant rumble rising from the clouds, like the murmuring of ancient drums preparing to strike. Villagers backed away as the ground seemed to vibrate underfoot. Mothers clutched their children. Elders pressed their palms together in trembling disbelief. Even the chief, known for his unshakable posture, stared skyward with a slackened jaw. The sky darkened further, turning the village into a landscape of muted gold and deep shadow. Every breath felt suspended. Every movement felt fragile. Every gaze fixed upon the heavens waited for the one sign that would confirm whether this was a miracle or a warning. And then, with the force of a story unfolding at last, the sky split open. A single roar of thunder tore across the heavens, loud, deep, alive, echoing through every hut, every field, every trembling heart. And before the villagers could even gasp, the first heavy raindrop fell, striking the ground with a weight that sounded like destiny announcing itself. The sky did not open gently. It tore itself apart with a sound that felt ancient enough to awaken buried histories, and from its wounded belly poured rain, heavy, fierce, impossibly pure. For a moment, the downpour struck the earth with such urgency, it seemed as if the ground itself was drinking life after years of thirst, as if every forgotten seed beneath the soil rose in gratitude. The first sheets of rain fell with a force that stunned the village into stillness. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no child exhaled, no mother blinked, no elder stepped forward. The sound was overwhelming, a wild symphony drumming against rooftops, splashing over the dusty plains, filling the air with a scent so rich it felt like tasting memory. The dryness that had chained the land for 3 merciless years broke in a single breath, replaced by the rhythmic roar of water claiming its rightful place. Then, something beautiful happened. The children moved first, dropping their gourds and baskets, rushing into the open with shrieks of laughter sharper than any thunder. Barefoot and uninhibited, they danced in the forming puddles, their feet splashing mud into the air, their voices lifting like songs for the gods. Their arms spread wide as if embracing the sky, their faces tilted upward to feel each cold drop striking their warm skin. Their joy was unfiltered, unmeasured, a raw celebration of survival. Women followed, gasping as rain drenched their wraps and soaked their hair, their hands moving instinctively to catch the drops as though verifying the miracle. Some fell to their knees, palms pressed into the wet earth, letting the mud seep between their fingers while tears mixed with rain on their cheeks. They whispered prayers drowned by the storm, yet carried by the gratitude trembling in their bodies. The elders, those who rarely revealed emotion, broke entirely. They raised their wrinkled faces, letting the rain spill over their lines like a mapping of every hardship they had endured. Some stretched trembling hands toward the sky. Others leaned on walking sticks as the weight of relief bent their shoulders. They wept openly, their sobs swallowed by the thunder, their hearts releasing the sorrow they had held for years. One elder dropped his staff and lifted both hands high, whispering, "We are remembered. We are remembered again." The rain's impact spread quickly. Wells that once echoed with hollow emptiness filled rapidly, their dark mouths gulping the descending streams until water overflowed in thick, glimmering waves. Women rushed to place containers beneath the edge of their roofs, watching in wonder as clear, cold water spilled into their bowls faster than they could gather. The village well, long believed cursed, regained its strength in minutes, the sound of water rushing within its stone walls echoing like a long-lost heartbeat returning home. The land responded with its own kind of joy. The soil softened instantly, transforming from cracking dryness to tender richness. The first drops sank deep, awakening dormant seeds, stirring roots that had not been touched by moisture in years. The smell of wet earth, deep, sweet, alive, rose in waves heavy enough to make the villagers gasp. It was the scent of rebirth, the scent of possibility, the scent of a story restarting. Amid the chaos of celebration, Nalia did not dance. She stood at the center of the village, motionless as rain poured over her small frame. Water streamed through her hair, down her arms, and across her face. But she blinked slowly, feeling something inside her expand with the storm. She looked not overwhelmed, not frightened, but profoundly aware. Aware that what she had asked for had arrived with the full weight of a promise fulfilled. The spirit's presence hummed gently inside her chest, pulsing in delicate waves of recognition. She understood that the rain wasn't the end of her offering. It was merely the first sign. Villagers began circling her slowly, not with suspicion this time, but with awe, caution, and a reverence they didn't yet know how to express. They whispered her name in tones softer than the rain, watching her as though she held the key to something greater than the storm itself. Some approached with trembling hands, wanting to touch the child who had summoned the sky, while others knelt without knowing why. But Nalia kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, sensing a deeper movement beneath the miracle unfolding around her. Thunder cracked again, but this time the sound didn't echo with violence. It resonated like a drumbeat marking the start of a journey. The rain softened slightly, shifting from a furious downpour to a steady, life-giving rhythm. Villagers ran to gather water, children splashed through new muddy streams, elders murmured blessings, and the air buzzed with something between disbelief and euphoria. But Nalia felt something else, something the others could not sense. A faint tremor beneath her feet, a subtle shift in the softened ground, a whisper rising not from the sky, but from below. She crouched slowly, placing her palm on the wet soil. The earth was breathing, truly breathing, and beneath the thin layer of mud, something stirred with cautious intention, pushing upward as if responding to her sacrifice. As lightning illuminated the horizon, Nalia watched the earth swell, crack, and begin to part, revealing the first hint of something unexpected struggling to surface from the depths below. The rain had awakened more than life. It had awakened something buried. When the storm finally softened into a gentle whisper, the world did not return to what it had been. Instead, the rain revealed truths the earth had hidden for generations, truths softened into visibility by the storm's mercy, truths that rose from the soil as if summoned by Nalia's sacrifice. And as the village stepped cautiously onto the drenched ground, they found that the miracle had not ended with the rain. It had only begun to unveil itself. The air shimmered with the scent of renewal. Fog drifted lazily above the soaked fields, curling over the ground like sleeping spirits adjusting to fresh breath. Water pooled in newly carved streams that traced soft curves through the land, weaving through abandoned furrows and over cracked ridges that had now transformed into lush, pliable soil. Farmers returned to their fields hesitantly, their steps slow and reverent, unsure if what they were seeing was real or another dream made cruel by waking. But when they reached the heart of their land, the truth struck them with overwhelming clarity. The soil was no longer pale, lifeless dust. It had darkened into a deep, fertile richness that glistened under the morning light, thick and moist enough to cling lovingly to their fingertips. The first farmer to kneel gasped aloud as his hands sank effortlessly into the ground. Where once he had struggled to dig even with a full-strength hoe, he lifted a handful of the blessed soil, staring as droplets of water dripped between his fingers, carrying a deep brown hue, so vibrant it looked unreal. Whispers erupted behind him as others fell to their knees, scooping, feeling, testing. No one alive remembered the land ever looking like this. As villagers explored further, something even more extraordinary revealed itself. In places where the rainwater had surged with the strongest force, the earth split open in thin, glimmering lines, veins of mineral-rich stone sparkling beneath the softened mud. These were not the dull rocks they were accustomed to. These glimmers held colors that shimmered when touched by sunlight, ribbons of silver, hints of blue, faint threads of gold reflecting like captured lightning streaks. When the villagers poked at them with sticks or brushed mud aside with trembling hands, the colors glowed brighter, clean and smooth from being washed awake by the storm. It was as though the land had been storing its wealth beneath its skin, waiting for the right moment to bear its blessings. The wells, too, changed in ways that defied reason. As villagers approached with buckets, expecting only rainwater poured from rooftops, they heard something they had forgotten: the deep, rhythmic echo of moving water. When they peered inside, they saw not the shallow puddles of recent years, but swirling depths reflecting steady underground currents. It was as if ancient rivers buried beneath stone had risen from sleep, pulled upward by the force of the night's storm. The once dead wells now brimmed with crystal-clear water, cold enough to sting the tongue, sweet enough to bring tears to the eyes of those who tasted it. The changes did not stop at soil and stone. Within days, far sooner than nature should allow, small green shoots began poking through the wet ground. At first, just a few, uncertain and fragile, then dozens, then hundreds. Entire fields shimmered with the first breath of harvest, sprouts pushing upward with a determination born from something otherworldly. Plants that typically required weeks to break the surface now rose in mere days, bursting with life as though rushing to catch up on lost seasons. Villagers walked among them in stunned silence, their footsteps gentle as if afraid to disturb a miracle still unfolding. Even the chief, whose voice had often been harsh with doubt, stood in the middle of the fields, trembling. His staff slipped from his grasp and lodged into the soft soil at his feet. He pressed both hands against his head, shaking slowly as he turned in circles, taking in the stretch of new life expanding in every direction. This land, he murmured in disbelief, his voice cracking. This land has changed its heart. Around him, elders nodded with tearful reverence, unable to hide the awe glowing in their eyes. It was as if they were witnessing the birth of a new world within the bones of the old one. Nalia watched all this from a distance, not apart, but quietly connected. She walked barefoot through the softened earth, feeling the new life push beneath her toes like delicate pulses. The spirit's presence flickered gently within her, not loud, not demanding, but steady, as though satisfied with the unfolding of its promise. She did not tell the villagers what she felt, how the earth seemed to hum beneath her steps, or how the rain's last drops still warmed faintly beneath her skin. She simply observed with a calm older than her years, knowing the miracle was deeper than anyone realized, and the world, beyond the village's borders, had already begun to notice. Travelers, traders, and wandering shepherds carried whispers of the miracle village, a place where dead land revived overnight, where rain returned to the forgotten, where blessings grew from the ground like gold. And week by week, rumor spread farther, faster, until it reached ears that were not filled with wonder, but with ambition. Prosperity, like fire, warms those who gather around it, but it also draws predators from distances too far for ordinary eyes to see. In the weeks after the rain transformed Maji Nuru village into a cradle of rebirth, the newfound blessings began to shine so brightly they pierced the boundaries of rumor and reached hearts that did not carry gratitude, only hunger. And though the villagers celebrated, Nalia sensed something else trailing behind the miracle's glow, something cold, calculating, and clothed in human footsteps. The first strangers arrived quietly, their presence subtle enough to seem harmless. They came as traders bearing baskets of colorful cloth, beads, pots, and grain. They walked through the revived fields with wide eyes and exaggerated admiration, praising the village's transformation in voices sweet enough to disguise the sharpness beneath. They bowed to elders, laughed with farmers, and patted the children's heads as if blessing them. Yet their gaze always drifted, toward the mineral-rich stones exposed by the rain, toward the thick, fertile soil, toward the sparkling veins running across the land, like hidden rivers of value. Their smiles warmed the air, but their footsteps measured every inch of earth with greedy precision. Then came the officials, wearing crisp uniforms and polished boots that reflected the bright sun. They carried documents, clipboards, stamped papers, items meant to intimidate more than assist. They spoke with authority about registration, resource mapping, and land evaluation, using words heavy enough to confuse even the wisest elder. They walked through the village trailed by assistants who scribbled down everything they saw. The water levels in the wells, the unusual crops sprouting unnaturally fast, the glittering minerals washed clean by rain. Their faces remained expressionless, but their eyes shone with a sharp interest that unsettled anyone who paid attention. More strangers followed, merchants offering partnerships that sounded too generous, explorers claiming to study the land for scientific purposes, wealthy men dressed in imported fabrics whose perfumes lingered long after they left. Some arrived with gifts they insisted were tokens of goodwill: large sacks of grain, expensive tools, even small livestock. But their real currency was intention, and intention rarely hides for long. At night, they muttered softly among themselves, pointing at maps, marking ridges, circling the shiniest stones with quick, secretive gestures. The chief, once a steady pillar, became overwhelmed by the endless stream of visitors demanding his attention. From sunrise to sunset, he sat beneath the baobab tree, listening to formal speeches, veiled threats, sweet promises, and endless proposals, insisting the village must share its blessing for the good of the region. His voice grew hoarse from explaining that the land belonged to the people. His shoulders drooped under the weight of choices he had never imagined he would need to make. The more he resisted, the more pressure the strangers applied, always politely, but never gently. Whispers filled the village. Some villagers believed the outsiders brought opportunity. Others feared that too many eyes had found them too quickly. Markets grew busier, but conversations grew quieter. Smiles faded at the edges. Doors closed earlier than usual. Even the animals sensed unease, growing restless whenever large groups of strangers lingered near the mineral-rich hills. Through it all, Nalia watched silently. Every handshake prickled her skin. Every polite laugh hid a shadow. Every stranger who knelt to admire the soil carried a hunger their words attempted to disguise. The spirit's presence pulsed inside her with a tension she had never felt before. Not a warning spoken in words, but a weight pressing against her ribs, urging her to pay attention. She felt danger growing like a dark tide, creeping beneath the surface of gratitude. One evening, after watching another group of officials walk away with satisfied expressions, Nalia approached the elders. They stood in a tight circle, whispering urgently as if fearful the wind might repeat their words. She stepped into the center, her small figure illuminated by the orange glow of the setting sun. Her voice was steady, though worry threaded gently through each syllable. "Blessings must be guarded," she said. "Not every hand that reaches for us comes with care." The elders exchanged glances, troubled by the truth in her words. They knew miracles came with responsibility, but they had not expected protection to be needed so soon. The chief rubbed his forehead, exhaustion carving deep lines across his features. "We are trying," he murmured. "But their eyes, their papers, their promises, they press harder each day." Nalia felt the spirit stir inside her, a subtle tightening like a whisper urging her to stay alert. She lifted her chin, sensing the air shift with a tension that foretold something larger approaching, something that would not knock politely or pretend goodwill. The next morning, the village awoke to an unfamiliar convoy rolling toward them. Vehicles decorated with official emblems, loud enough to swallow birdsong, bold enough to silence gossip. Villagers gathered warily as a man stepped out, his presence towering, his clothes pristine, his gaze cold with predetermined intent. He looked at the land, then at the people, and with a voice heavy with authority, made an announcement that pierced the air like a blade. "This land," he declared, is now under state authority. And as his words settled like dust over the village, a shiver moved through the crowd, because blessings had indeed attracted attention, but not the kind they had prayed for. The council hut overflowed with tension so sharp it felt like walking through a storm without rain. Officials, traders, elders, and frightened villagers crowded inside, their arguments rising and crashing like clashing waves. And in the middle of that heated chaos, Nalia stepped forward, small in size, her feet barely dusting the ground, yet carrying a spirit so unshakable it shifted the air around her. Her presence alone quieted a few voices, but not enough. Not until she lifted her chin and prepared to speak. The room pulsed with accusations and overlapping demands. The man who had declared their land state property stood at the center with an air of rigid authority, surrounded by guards who shadowed every movement of the villagers. He spoke of development plans, of land divisions, of mineral extraction rights and water control systems. His voice carried certainty, as though the village's consent was nothing more than a decorative formality. Farmers clenched their fists behind their backs. Mothers held their breath. Elders trembled, not from age, but from the feeling of history being rewritten by strangers. The chief attempted to argue, but the official brushed him aside with rehearsed courtesy. "This is beyond village jurisdiction," he insisted. "You will receive compensation. Your crops will be supported by our programs." His words were smooth, yet hollow, each phrase stitched carefully to hide the hunger beneath. He glanced at the mineral veins shining through the soil outside, and his eyes betrayed his true intentions. The elders noticed. The villagers noticed. And Nalia felt it like a bruise pressing against her ribs. She stepped forward quietly, and though no one had invited her, her presence commanded attention. The guards exchanged amused glances. The official arched a brow. "Child," he began, "this is not a place for you." But Nalia didn't waver. Her voice emerged soft but firm, steady as a river carved through stone. "I must speak," she said. "The spirit warned me that greed will return the drought. If we let your hunger touch this land, the rain will leave again." A ripple of disbelief circled the room. Some officials chuckled under their breath. One laughed openly, shaking his head. "Spirits and stories," he said dismissively. "This land is rich. It must be used properly." A trader behind him chimed in with artificial patience. "Little one, you don't understand how the world works." Their words drifted through the hut like spoiled smoke, clouding the air with condescension. But Nalia held her ground. She felt the spirit's presence hum inside her, subtle but firm, giving her the courage she needed. She repeated, more clearly this time, "Greed will bring the drought back." The laughter grew louder, until the sky dimmed. It happened swiftly. One moment the afternoon sun drenched the village in warm light. The next, a shadow fell directly over the council hut, leaving the surrounding fields untouched. People gasped. Guards stiffened. The official's smile faltered. Nalia didn't move, her eyes fixed on the trembling beams of sunlight playing along the edges of the darkness overhead. The spirit had answered, not in thunderous prophecy, but in silence heavy enough to silence everyone else. Villagers began to gather outside, whispering among themselves as they noticed the unnatural darkness. It hovered like a cloud, carved specifically for them, a warning drawn with precision. Mothers pulled their children close. Farmers muttered prayers. Elders exchanged glances laden with memory and fear. Whatever they believed before, the changing sky forced their doubts into stillness. Nalia turned toward her people, and something inside her shifted. Her voice deepened, not in tone, but in certainty. When she spoke again, it carried an authority that did not belong to a girl of her age. It belonged to someone touched by something older than time. "This land was healed because we honored it," she said. "If we dishonor it now, it will close itself again." Her words stretched through the hut like threads of truth, binding the attention of even those who wanted to look away. The official opened his mouth, ready to reclaim control with polished phrases and administrative threats. But before he could speak, thunder cracked, once sharp as the snap of a whip, directly above the council hut. It was not the rolling roar of a rainstorm. It was a single, decisive sound, like the sky delivering judgment. Dust drifted from the roof. A few elders stumbled backward. Even the guards reached for their weapons as if metal could protect them from the anger of the heavens. Nalia stood unmoving. Then something extraordinary happened. A sudden gust of cold wind swept through the hut, swift, focused, unnervingly precise. It did not touch the walls. It did not lift the papers scattered on the table. It circled only Nalia, swirling around her ankles, rising to her waist, brushing her cheeks with a coldness that held both warning and protection. Her braids fluttered like ribbons caught in a sacred current. Her dress trembled. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but recognition. The wind stilled. Silence consumed the hut. Every face turned toward the girl who now stood bathed in a presence no human authority could deny. And as the air settled with a force that made even the boldest outsider swallow hard, Nalia breathed in, and the entire room froze, realizing the spirit had chosen its guardian. The next word spoken would decide the fate of the village forever. Months passed, and Maji Nuru began to glow in a way that words struggled to contain. What had once been a village, shrinking beneath the weight of drought, now stretched toward the horizon with the confidence of a land reborn. Fields shimmered with healthy crops. Children's laughter replaced the silence of famine, and the scent of fresh water drifted through the air like a promise finally fulfilled. And silently, like a quiet thread weaving everything together, Nalia's prayer lived inside every corner of prosperity. The transformation unfolded slowly at first, timid, unsure, like a child learning to walk after years of crawling through dust. Newly softened soil responded eagerly to seeds that had once struggled to break through the cracked earth. Within weeks, small green shoots pushed upward with an energy no one had witnessed in their lifetime. Farmers gathered at dawn to watch fields once dead stretch themselves awake in rich, vibrant colors. Millet, sorghum, cassava, beans. Everything seemed to grow with a generosity the land hadn't shown in generations. Harvest seasons that used to bring fear now brought abundance so great that granaries had to be expanded twice. With harvest came trade. Minerals washed loose by the rain gleamed under the sun, like blessings the earth had been hiding for a forgotten time. Traders from distant towns returned, this time not with deception in their eyes, but with respect shaped by the story of a village protected by more than law. The chief, strengthened by unity, created strict rules for responsible trade, ensuring that wealth entered the village without stripping it. Fair deals replaced hidden intentions, and for the first time in memory, families had enough to save, enough to build, enough to dream. Markets flourished, filled with fruits, grains, fabrics, pottery, and music that echoed through the village every afternoon. Stalls multiplied. Voices rose in lively bargaining, and children ran between vendors with roasted maize in their hands. Life pulsed through the village like a drumbeat, steady and confident. And with every new sunrise, Majinoru stepped further away from the memory of its suffering. Schools rose next, strong, bright buildings shaped from clay, stone, and community determination. Classrooms filled with eager children who once had only time for survival, now spent mornings writing stories, learning sums, and reciting lessons with growing pride. Teachers arrived from nearby towns, drawn by the tale of a brave child who spoke to the sky. Education, once a distant dream, became a daily rhythm, nurturing minds that had endured the weight of hunger far too long. New wells followed, 3 at first, then 2 more. Their waters flowed clean and clear, reducing illness, easing labor, and freeing women and girls from the miles of walking they once endured beneath the burning sun. Time saved became time invested in crafts, learning, planting, and raising small businesses. The village no longer survived day by day. It planned, invested, and expanded. And through it all, Nalia walked quietly among her people. She did not claim authority. She did not ask for recognition. Yet the village gave her both with a reverence that felt woven into the earth itself. Adults greeted her with respectful nods. Children followed her steps with wide, admiring eyes. Travelers spoke her name in hushed awe. Elders called her the child who spoke to the rain, a title she held with a humility that deepened the affection around her. She remained the same girl, soft-spoken, thoughtful, observant, but she carried a light inside her that everyone felt. One night, long after the village had fallen asleep under the blanket of stars, Nalia walked to the ancestral well. It no longer looked abandoned. Flowers grew beside it, and fireflies drifted gently above its rim. She placed her hand on its cool surface, and the air shifted around her, familiar, ancient, welcoming. The spirit appeared not in form, but in presence, like a deep breath from the earth itself. Its voice brushed against her heart, warm and steady. "You have honored the gift," it murmured, "and the land has honored you in return." A calm washed over her, heavier than sleep, lighter than wind. She felt the spirit's blessing settle quietly into her bones. Not a command, not a burden, but a promise that her journey wasn't simply to save her village, but to carry light wherever shadows touched the earth. When the spirit withdrew, she was left standing in the gentle glow of moonlight, knowing some destinies are whispered long before they are understood. The village learned to protect its blessings with discipline and gratitude. They guarded their resources, nurtured their soil, and treated prosperity not as a treasure to be exploited, but as a responsibility to uphold. Every festival included a moment of silence for the drought they survived, a reminder that blessings were not permanent unless honored with care. Life blossomed everywhere, but far beyond the hills, where the horizon swallowed the distance into a pale, trembling line, something else stirred. Cracked earth spread across another land. Wells dried. Animals wandered weakly. Children stared at a sky that refused to break. And in that forgotten place, another village waited, thirsty, fragile, and desperate for a miracle, hoping for a child brave enough to lift their face to the sky and speak the way Nalia once did. If Nalia's journey touched your spirit, don't let her story fade here. Your support helps these powerful people reach the hearts that need hope the most. Like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss a story that might change someone's life. And tell me in the comments, what part spoke to your soul the loudest? Your voice keeps this storytelling family alive.